Harrow. When Harrow turned south toward his home kingdom's capital of Hisafe to enlist in King Tanzanite's army, he brought a small throng of men and women who intended to join with him. He had gravely missed his family, and he intended to find his mother and siblings wherever the Raisaglai had taken them. Although his traveling companions doubted that his family still lived, Harrow refused to believe that they had been killed. He clung onto the hope he'd reunite with them someday. He had to find them. His company composed of those who had the most to lose in the beastly conflict from the northern towns of Ferdin, Sovane, and Wojet. While he hadn't even traveled to Ferdin, the citizens sought out his group after the news of his plight spread to them via word of mouth. The Ferdinese and Wojetan travelers both struggled in the desert Sovani climate. The Ferdinese lived in immaculately carved, chilled caves and found the undimmed hue of the sun's light perturbing. Meanwhile, the Wojetan typically resided in the floating sky cities with a constant supply of fresh water flowing between their verdant platforms, so the dry heat of the Wan Desert irritated them. The Sovani, like himself, experienced little difficulty through the harsh sands. The night before Harrow's collective was to reach Hisafe, they lit a little fire despite the warmth around them. They had minimal kindling left from their journey, but they only needed it long enough to cook the evening meal. Around the diminutive blaze, the group of 20 ate whatever food they still had on them. Sickle, a Sovani farmer like Harrow, cooked a stew for everyone using the vegetables and dried lamb that had yet to spoil. He even threw in a couple of locusts they had managed to catch. The fresh meat fouled within the first day of travel, so they often supplemented their meals with whatever protein they could obtain. Harrow ate a pomegranate and watched as the fire boiled the stew. While Sickle cooked, a winemaker named Brut cleared his throat to sing over the fire. Tuner, the bard, picked up his fiddle and played along. Brut sang The Red Maiden. There is much to fear from women and girls. They look innocent with their dresses and pearls. They'll pressure you to give a good dance and whirl. I don't doubt the red fire lest you want to burn. Some men caution it's the fathers to beware. Their aggression and possession can be hard to bear. They'll pressure you with crossed arms and a stare. I don't doubt the red fire lest you want to burn. Hear me when I say that they'll conspire to kill. After your wedding, don't take shock if you take ill. They know their way around their poisons and pills. I don't doubt the red fire lest you want to burn. If you spend too much time on the highway, keep them in the kitchen, that's where they'll stay. Plotting the end to your very last day. I don't doubt the red fire lest you want to burn. I tell you it should be your greatest concern. I hope that you hear me, I hope that you learn. Life without a woman is one without spurn. I don't doubt the red fire lest you want to burn. Harrow had loved traveling with his band of misfits and hoped he would train with them once they reached Hisafe. After losing his town, he had been surprised how fast he felt a sense of community again. He had grown particularly fond of the glassblower, Reamer. She wore her straight hair short, but long enough to cover her ears, one of which was half scorched off from an accident with her family's furnace. A dimple piercing detracted attention away from her childhood injury, but it didn't bother Harrow. What mattered was that she had a great sense of humor, always making him laugh and smile, despite their circumstances. It had taken him longer than it should have, but he had developed feelings for her during their travels together. As soon as he drummed up the courage to ask her to take a stroll with him, a few soldiers garbed in full bronze armor dashed to their fire. "What's wrong?" "Papads attacked us," one soldier said breathlessly. Harrow's spirits sank. It had taken so much time to tell the king and to warn the villages of the Rysik threat. Now that soldiers had gone to deal with the problem, they were endangered by their own kind. Why can't everyone understand the danger and band together as one people? Remer set a concerned hand on his shoulder, asking if he was all right with her green gaze. Harrow had never seen the sea, but he imagined her eyes were the color of it. We must tell King Tanzanite. Harrow stood, moving away from Remer's consoling touch. We fully intend to, but light yields safer travels, another soldier said. The darkness made it feel like there were dozens of assailants. Can we camp with your group? A soldier asked, looking to his fellow weary companions and then around to Harrow's company. Of course! We're on our way to enlist ourselves, Harrow said. Soon we will all be brothers and sisters of the sword. The soldiers shot Harrow grateful glances. They each set up their blankets in the open spots around the edges of camp. I'll stand watch tonight, Harrow offered, to ensure the footpads do not disturb anyone. With so many of us, I find it hard to believe they would try. They would probably be intimidated enough without a guard, Remer said. I want to be sure. It was times like these that Harrow desperately wished for a weapon. Of all the items he collected in his journeys, he never managed to get the one tool he required most. He hadn't dwelled for long because he would be issued a standard grade saber upon enlisting. Still, what he wouldn't have given to have obtained his weapon a day earlier to protect the soldiers that were trying to protect him and the rest of the realm. The whole group shared the soup that Sickle had prepared. While they ate, Harrow's friends eagerly asked what to expect once enlisted. We're all part of the Crusade's new recruits. We lived in Hisafe and joined after the priest called for the crusade, one of the soldiers said to answer Tuner's prior question. But what was it like as soon as you joined? Brett asked. We weren't given much training. As soon as we fitted with armor and given a blade, they shoved us onto the road, a different soldier explained. That seems odd, Remer said. Our instructors told us we'd get more training on the front line. Part of the idea is to deploy as many platoons as possible while the other kingdom's forces gather at the capital to march up together. Like a stalling tactic, but also a show of force. The Rhysogli don't know we aren't trained. They'll just see the difference in our numbers and run. Have there been any battles with the Rhysogli as of yet? Harrow asked. It's been more than a full turn of the moons. I don't know. I would imagine so, but that information has yet to leak through our chain of command. I haven't seen any related headlines from the news post either. The footpads slaughtered our first sergeant, but she might have known. She sometimes bought the parchments. I don't understand why footpads would assault soldiers. Remer's tone was both horrified and mystified. Soldiers aren't wealthy, unless they're knights, I suppose. Perhaps wrong place, wrong time? Sickle said. They were waiting for us along the path. If they were unfit to make this journey, they may have become desperate, Brett suggested. At the first sign of people, perhaps they thought they could find food on them. Or within them. You're saying they might be cannibals? Sickle asked, skeptical. If I wasn't prepared for this trek, I don't know what I might stoop to. We could have been in their place if we hadn't traveled to join the crusade on our own and hadn't been prepared, Brett said realistically. Silence befell the camp as the group contemplated the terror of having one's instincts overtake their senses due to starvation or dehydration. They're only a day out from the city. You think that they could hold on to hope for one more day, Remer said, breaking the silence. They could have been lost, Sickle said. Whatever the circumstances, I hope the footpads die out there, one of the soldiers said. Harrow considered a different possibility. If they're trying to join the crusade, but got lost, perhaps we should look for them to help them. The soldiers seemed startled by the concept. Self-consciously, Harrow backtracked. Never mind, it would be far too dangerous. The group relaxed their tense expressions. Harrow withdrew from the conversation afterwards. Feeling awkward and wanting to avoid social interaction, he paced around the open desert. Slowly after he rose, Remer joined him. He slid his eyes over to her, but didn't say anything. Do you know why I joined you, Harrow? Harrow shook his head. Well, he could guess. He hadn't known for certain. It was because you believed so strongly in your cause. I wanted to be part of it. I admire your dedication, but I also admire your faith and goodness, she said. Other people assume the worst freely, but you always find the best in people. It makes you pleasant to be around. Reamer sounded like she was smiling, but he didn't check. Thanks for trying to help. It's not working, is it? Being near you is comforting. Her presence always calms me. She squeezed his hand with her own. Her eyes reflected the firelight. I hope we get deployed together, she said. I'd like that too. Either way, I'm going to help you save your family and the rest of your town too. Thank you, Reamer. Wake me at second moon high. I'll take over the watch from you. You should get your sleep, Harrow said. No sense in both of us being tired tomorrow. He smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. Reamer nodded. If you change your mind, the offer still stands. I'm off to bed now, in case you do. I appreciate it, but I'm not going to change my mind. Enjoy the extra sleep, Harrow called after her as she returned to the fire. He sat in the sands away from the group. He looked to the planets and stars, his nightly reminder that he navigated in the correct direction. Hagam's sister planets shone brightly through the atmosphere. Their light was beautiful, though often overshadowed by moon's light. What would it be like to live with the harpies or the dimension hoppers on their respective planets? There are still plenty of species on Hagam I haven't met. The elementals and any of the legendary beasts. There were allegedly Maras in the south and a dragon in the west. An oracle prophesied in the northeast kingdom of Wojet, and all sorts of cursed creatures allegedly called Balia Island home. Harrow imagined just how insignificant he was in comparison to the rest of the world and the rest of the binary star system. A tear rolled down his cheek. He wouldn't have called it crying. He had had enough injuries in the field to know. The droplet came from nowhere. Additional ones did not follow, and he doubted his eyes flushed red. He could blame the dry heat of the desert, but that wasn't it either. His thoughts turned to the monarchs. What do they think of this mess? Do they know how things are? Will Low King Tanzanite remember me when I deliver another tale of woe? I have been fortunate that he believed me the first time. Will I be as lucky again? He trusted my word enough to send his transportation mage across his kingdom with my warning. How convenient it would be if they could transport the entire crusade party from every land right to Fukori. But it would be impossible to accomplish such a feat. Most transportation mages seem to only send letters and newspaper parchment back and forth. It would be nice to bypass the dangers of the road. We could all fight together, as one army, rather than have a staggered arrival. If the arrivals have poor timing, the Rhysogli could feed on enough blood to overcome the strength of any mage's magic, and the beasts would gain experience killing soldiers, whereas the recruits would have none with killing Rhysogli. I need to stop living too much in my head. Harrow's feelings of awkwardness had ebbed, even though his brain kept regurgitating the soldiers' disapproval for him to cringe at again. He would have to rewrite it with better memories. Tuner had still been playing his fiddle, while the others broke off into individual conversations. He'd continued the song The Red Maiden, even though Brett didn't pick up the vocals again. The conversation died down as everyone drifted to sleep. Harrow had been unhappy to have Tuner retire, as it made the night eerily quiet once the fiddle stopped singing. He fed the fire long after it should have died out. He was too afraid to be in the dark alone. The flame gradually became smaller and smaller, but it was enough to have light for comfort. When the firelight extinguished, he looked to the moons. It was second moon high, and he could trade his post with Reamer. He desperately wanted to. He was terrified someone was watching him, but having someone to talk to would assuage him. Reamer might just tell me I'm being paranoid. A blade found its way to his throat. It dangled there precisely, barely touching his windpipe with its cool, sharp edge. Do not make a sound. You are not a soldier. Therefore, I will not kill you if I don't have to. If you wake your friends, then I will. I see you are unarmed. This fact has also spared your life this night. A moment later, the voice received a face with rounded features as a woman shifted from behind him to his front. Her wide-set eyes and broad mouth had a kindly aspect to them that made it hard for him to comprehend what was going on. She did not have the expression of a killer. She seemed as anxious and uncertain as he felt. Perhaps if she had looked more ferocious, his instinct would have been to scream. Harrow watched in horror as the footpads stood over the soldiers and swiftly separated their heads from their bodies. The executions generated swift crunches as the weapons sliced through their spines. The footpads scooped up the heads and placed them into bloody sacks. Brett stirred in his sleep. The footpads froze, and the metal edge pressed in hard against Harrow's neck. The woman stole a glance toward the rousing winemaker before turning her attention back to Harrow. She shot him a warning glance. Harrow gulped against her blade. "Everything all right, Harrow?" Brett asked without sitting up. The woman before him nodded. Yes." Harrow tried to keep the panic from his voice. He feared his friends' lives depended on how well he did. Brett didn't respond, but he shifted until he settled into what seemed like a comfortable position. Only once Brett started snoring did Harrow whisper, "Why? Why are they taking the soldiers' heads? Why aren't they stealing their coin and gem? Why aren't they killing all of us? Why are they doing this?" "We have our orders," the woman whispered indifferently. "We need to make a living too." Harrow wanted to toss up the pomegranate sitting inside of his stomach as the images processed inside his brain. The dead bodies of the soldiers littered the ground, neck stumps pumping blood into the desert sands, staining the midnight blue sands black. "They were going to fight the Reiseklai," Harrow protested weakly. "There will be others. If you embark on such a pursuit, don't come this way. Tell your leadership to take the merchant road." "On Scylla," one of the others snapped at the woman threatening Harrow. "We're ready. Let's go." She withdrew the blade and shut it closed, revealing her weapon to be a mere pair of fabric scissors. A brand of a flaming river marked the back of her non-wielding hand. "Do not make me live to regret sparing your life." Ancilla scurried into the night with the murderers. Grief overwhelmed Harrow. "I couldn't do anything to protect the soldiers. I failed them, the kingdom, the realm, and my friends. Something as simple as a tailoring tool stopped me. How can the others trust me now? How can I convince them that I had their best interests at heart when I didn't help the soldiers? When I acted so selfishly?" He could twist the story and say that if he had startled anyone else, more would die. But it wasn't true. He hadn't thought anything. He couldn't process the situation fast enough to make any decisions. His remaining silence wasn't a choice, rather his instinctual reaction. But it was a petty excuse. What do I do? Rouse Reamer and tell her what passed? I don't want her to know. He didn't want anyone to judge him as he should be judged. And yet, at the same time, he did. He needed social rejection to serve as a punishment for his cowardice. What will Mother think when she judges my soul? I allowed her rescuers to perish. Harrow considered meditating over the situation, but he didn't have time. He rifled through the soldiers' supplies and found a cloth bandage. On it, with the soldier's blood, he wrote, "I could not protect them. H." Harrow didn't know how to write much in the common tongue, but he pieced the few words together. While he hoped he had spelled everything correctly, he didn't give the message more thought. He placed it in the center of the slumbering bodies, where someone would notice it. He picked up his belongings, drew an arrow in the sand pointing towards Hisofe, and took off in the direction himself. It was the only way he could live with himself. He was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to sleep, but he decided getting the information to his low king was the best he could do. His friends would be safe now that the threat of the footpads had passed. It would be unlikely that anyone else would pass their way. The only reason the attackers probably found them was because he had kept the fire going for too long. I could kick myself for my stupidity. Harrow didn't want to leave Reamer. He wanted to give her a proper explanation. He also never wanted to have to explain himself to her. He wanted to put all of this behind himself. He had made a new family in a cycle of the moons. He could make another. Better yet, he could recover the first one that he had lost. He wanted to lash out over the violence he witnessed. He didn't think he would ever forget the sound of the sword cutting through the bones and flesh of the soldiers' necks. Harrow looked to his finger, covered in dried blood from writing his message. He scraped off the dusting. In the moonlight, he couldn't tell if he had gotten all of it or not. Harrow heaved his breaths. He could not spare the tears. There was simply not enough water in his body to waste it on expressing his emotions. He set to make the most of the situation. Passing the information to the king would prevent the soldier's death from being in vain. He had to try. It was the only thing he wasn't powerless to do.